Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate the Parliamentary Secretary's comments. And I would like to ask her if she could elaborate about C-55 and ministerial discretion versus science-based evidence, and how the government is through this legislation giving that power to the minister without establishing a basis of what I spoke about earlier in terms of minimum protection standards. The scientific community has clearly identified around the world that we need minimum protection standards if we want to see MPAs work. And my colleague from Fleetwood Port Kells asked about if we don't do this right, the consequences of getting it wrong. So I asked my honourable colleague to comment on that.
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thank you very much for the question and for the leadership of my honourable colleague in this arena. It's noted, and I think Canadians are very grateful for the work he has done. I think the most important thing to note is that within the legislation, the precautionary principle is very important. The fact that we are providing interim measures is very important. It signals that we are trying to move as quickly as we can toward greater protections. Secondly, there's no question that our government hasn't put science, scientists, science-based research at the heart of much of the work that many departments do. And so I think that the member opposite can feel quite confident that that's essential. And thirdly, the fact that the minister has discretion in the context of that is a testament to his leadership with regard to ocean protection. Thank you.
Comments? The honourable member for Caribou, Prince George.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank our honourable colleague for her passionate speech. Madam Speaker, she just answered a question from our honourable colleague from Port Moody with respect to, again, moving as fast as this government can to put those protections in place. And I asked, Madam Speaker, at what cost? Madam Speaker, we have heard at committee testimony from Canadians from coast to coast to coast to coast, stakeholders, Indigenous groups, industry, NGOs, environmental groups, scientists, that the process has to be thorough. It has to be, we all agree that we need to be moving in the right direction in terms of protection of our oceans. But that process has to be thorough and it has to be true. So through you, Madam Speaker, I just would like to ask our honourable colleague, what does she have to say to the hundreds of stakeholders, if not thousands of stakeholders across Canada that have felt alienated by her government's lack of consultation on this process? Through you, Madam Speaker, I'll offer that to our honourable colleague.
The honourable Secretary to the Minister of International Trade.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and to my honourable colleague, it's wonderful to think that we might all agree. Certainly, this is something that stakeholders are passionate about, our government is passionate about, and I listened to the Minister in his introductory speech where he recognized the input that he's received. He recognized that he must listen to all of the groups that this affects, but the Act is 20 years out of date. We fell behind in the last decade, and we're making up for that. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Development.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I'd like to ask my honourable colleague, she started off opening her speech by talking about the Canada being surrounded from coast to coast to coast with water, and it being critically important, of course, to each and every person in this chamber and across our country. But I wanted to ask her, from the perspective of development and sustainable development, how important this initiative is to ensure that Canada stays leading in terms of our commitment to the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development Goals.
The Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Trade.
Thank you very much. That's a very good question. Speaking in particular as a Member of Parliament from the West Coast, there is nothing that is more respected or revered than wild salmon. Protecting the habitat for wild salmon, for orcas, for herring, for whatever species in the chain, means that the natural abundance can come back and thrive. And I think that what sustainability really means is, are you taking into account all of the aspects that allow the environment and the economy to proceed at the same time? The Sustainable Development Goals are very important to us, and we feel that this step is in response to that and in response to the interests of the community who take this to heart. And that's what gives me such great pride to be addressing this on behalf of the Minister. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Port Moody, Coquitlam.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd just like to add a comment. I share the Parliamentary Secretary's passion for wild salmon and for other marine wildlife and ecosystems, and I appreciate her comments on that. In terms of the question that was just asked, I just wanted to add before I get to my question that unfortunately Canada is not a leader in ocean protection. We are well behind, as we have outlined. Many countries are well ahead of us. We're at now 3.5%. Other countries are at over 30%. So we have a lot of catching up to do. But my question is around co-governance, working with First Nation, Inuit, and Métis. How does this government expect to work with those bodies of those governments in moving forward at establishing MPAs on all three coasts?
Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you very much. We recognize the road ahead of us with regard to marine protection, and that's why the comments that I just made refer to the ability that the government is recommending for an interim marine protected areas so that we can state our intent as all of the other pieces unfold toward much greater marine protected areas of our coast. Co-governance is essential to us. Our relationship with Indigenous peoples of Canada is essential to us. And frankly, this is the opportunity to demonstrate that. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? The honourable member for North Okanagan, Shuswap.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate the member from North Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Highway. Beautiful part of the country, and quite a long riding name. I congratulate her on her speech, and I know her passion for wild salmon on the West Coast, and I share that passion. But again, I'm going to ask this question about what her thoughts are on the ability for the minister to move forward without the scientific evidence or scientific backing on some of these closures. How can that be defendable out there when the world environmental community is so focused on making sure we have the science right?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
I would like to take this opportunity to point to two other very exciting initiatives of our government under the leadership of the Minister, and that is in Moncton and in West Vancouver, Science Enterprise Centres, which are the revitalization, reinvestment, reigniting science enterprise in these flagship labs on both coasts. And when you bring the community in and you bring science partners together, I can assure you that one of the #1 priorities is environmental conservation, is concern for pollution of the ocean, concern for plastics in the ocean, concern for the potential threats of open net fish farms. These questions are being raised by the community, and our government is putting those questions directly toward 2 new flagship science enterprise centres to answer. Thank you.
We have time for a very brief question. The honourable member for Port Moody, Coquitlam.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and appreciate again the comments the Parliamentary Secretary has provided us. I want to just ask for a quick elaboration on empowering other partners to do the work that she talked about in terms of enforcement of marine protected areas. If you could elaborate as to who those partners are and how they will have the power to go. You mentioned across land into neighboring the oceans. Just what that would look like. Are First Nations included in this? How this will roll out in those particular communities?
I won't elaborate on it, but I'm sure it was through me that you were asking the question. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, a very brief answer, please.
Briefly, as I mentioned in my comments, examples would be the Guardian Watchmen, Indigenous communities on the North Pacific Coast, and also both provincial and local law enforcement. I've seen this, I'm sure many of you have in our wonderful waterways, that citizens see things happening and there's no one to call. And we feel that we have such engaged partners on oceans protection that this will be very welcome. And of course, it's extended fundamentally to Indigenous peoples, but also local law enforcement.